You think you know cold, but not this cold. Not the kind that stalked medieval nights like a living creature, slipping through walls, stealing breath, waiting for someone, anyone, to let the fire die. Imagine this. You're wrapped in every scrap of cloth you own, but the wind still cuts through you like a blade. Your home creaks in the dark. Your stomach is empty. And the fire, your only defense, is shrinking, fading, threatening to leave you alone with the night. There's no heater, no blankets fresh from the dryer, no electricity, no comfort, no pause button, just you, and the ancient cold that once ruled Europe. Most people today wouldn't last an hour. Medieval peasants had to survive the whole night. If this kind of storytelling brings you inner peace, feel free to like the video and subscribe, but only if it truly brings you peace. And let me know in the comments where in the world are you listening from, and what time it is for you right now. It's always strangely comforting to know who else is out there closing their eyes to the same story. So settle in, let the world grow quiet, and let's dream together for a while. You don't realise how fragile warmth is until you imagine a medieval night settling over the land. The moment the sun slips away, a hush falls. Not peaceful but expectant, as if the world itself is bracing for what comes next. Cold drifts in like smoke, seeping through the thin walls of wattle and daub, threading itself between the cracks in the roof, touching skin, breath, bone. You feel it before the darkness is even complete. A creeping, deliberate presence, older than memory. Families gather close, almost instinctively. The fire becomes the centre of everything, a trembling ember that means survival if it lives, and danger if it fades. Even the smell of smoke, sharp, bitter, clinging to hair and clothes, is a comfort here, because it means warmth still exists. Outside, the world stiffens under frost. Inside, every movement feels careful, purposeful. The slow stirring of a pot, a child pulled closer under a wool blanket, the whisper of voices trading stories to keep fear from taking root. And as you stand in that flickering half-light, you begin to understand what medieval winter really was. It wasn't simply weather. It wasn't just cold. It was a force, constant, hungry, unrelenting, shaping how people lived, how they slept, how they loved, feared, and endured. Yet somehow, through instinct, community, and sheer will, they did endure. You like to imagine the past as distant, almost unreal. Castles on hills, snow falling gently like in a painting. But if you were dropped into a real medieval winter, the first thing you'd feel is not romance. It would be shock. The cold wouldn't greet you politely. It would hit you like a wall. The air is thinner somehow, sharper, carrying a kind of silence that makes every sound, every footstep, every creaking board echo a little louder. There are no streetlights, no hum of distant traffic, no warm glow from windows promising central heating and hot showers. Just a fading grey sky and a wind that feels like it's trying to carve its way through you. You stand in the middle of a small village and everything looks washed in silver and brown. Fields lie empty and hard, the soil frozen into ridges. Trees are bare and black against the sky, their branches like fingers reaching upwards. Smoke coils from a few low, crooked roofs, thin and hesitant, as if even the fire is struggling to survive. This isn't just winter. This is a season that dominates every choice, every breath, especially when the sun goes down. For medieval peasants, nightfall in winter was not a cosy pause between days. It was a battle they had to fight repeatedly, again and again, with no guarantee they would win. The dangers are everywhere, layered on top of each other. The cold is relentless, sinking into fingers and toes until they burn and then go numb. Hunger is always close by, a dull ache in the stomach that no one has the luxury to complain about. Illness lurks in the air, coughs that don't heal, fevers that rise in small, dark rooms with no medicine to bring them down. And yet, in the middle of this harshness, life goes on. You watch as people move through the village with a kind of weary purpose. They know what's coming. They've lived through winters before. They've watched neighbours grow weaker, fires die out too early, loved ones not wake up. Survival isn't a surprise here. It's an assignment, one they can't afford to fail. As the light begins to thin, the village changes. Tasks become faster, more urgent. Wood must be brought inside before it freezes harder, before fingers stop cooperating. Animals must be fed and secured, their warmth and life a quiet reassurance in the dark. The last traces of daylight are used carefully, mending clothes, patching walls, scraping together whatever food can be stretched into a thin, steaming meal. The home, however small, however smoky or cramped, turns into the centre of the universe. It's not just shelter. It's the only barrier between a fragile body and a merciless night. You step inside one of these homes and feel it instantly. The difference between outside and in. It's not truly warm, not by your standards, but it's less brutal. There is a hearth, a low fire alive with embers, burning more out of necessity than comfort. The air is thick with smoke that makes your eyes sting and your throat scratch, but people here barely notice it anymore. To them, smoke is a sign of protection, a sign that the cold hasn't won yet. Families gather close to that fire, the way you might gather around a screen. This is where stories live, where fears are shared and softened, where children learn silently by watching how the adults move, how they ration food, how they feed the fire, how they listen to the wind. Outside, the world is vast and dangerous. Inside, it becomes smaller, tighter, more focused. Survival shrinks your priorities into something brutally simple. Stay warm, stay fed, stay alive until morning. And yet, in that struggle, you also see something intensely human. You see a mother tucking a child closer to her side, adjusting a blanket so it covers cold little feet. You see calloused hands hovering near the fire, just long enough to feel life creeping back into them before going back to work. You hear low voices trading small jokes or familiar tales, not because anyone has time for entertainment, but because fear is easier to bear when it has to compete with laughter. In the darkest months, resilience isn't a grand quality. It's made of tiny choices. One more log on the fire, one more stitch in a torn cloak, one more bite saved for later. It's the decision to keep going when everything around you suggests that stopping would be easier. As night settles in fully and the village fades into darkness, the only lights are those flickering hearths, scattered like stars turned inward. Each one is a declaration: we are still here. We are still resisting the cold. And as you watch them, you start to understand that medieval peasants didn't just endure winter, they were shaped by it. Their fears, their faith, their sense of community, even their idea of home grew out of the need to survive nights like this. You step into that world for just a moment, and suddenly your own winters feel very small. You think you've felt cold before, but nothing in your life prepares you for the kind that ruled medieval Europe. It wasn't a passing discomfort or a seasonal inconvenience. It was an adversary, a force that settled into the land and into the bodies of the people who lived there, testing them night after night. Step into that world, and the first thing that hits you is the wind. It doesn't brush against your skin. It carves its way through every layer you wear, slicing straight to the bone. It howls and moans around the corners of cottages, rattling the loose shutters, seeping through every crack like a creature searching for a way in. It carries with it scents of frozen soil, distant smoke, and the sharp, metallic bite of winter. The air feels thin, almost brittle, as if breathing too deeply might cause it to shatter. Indoors, things aren't much better. You expect warmth, relief, a soft reprieve from the night, but instead the cold follows you inside like a shadow. The walls, thin and uneven, offer only the illusion of shelter. You can see your breath with every exhale, hanging in the air before dissolving like a ghost. The surfaces you touch, wood, clay, stone, are cold enough to sting. Even the fire, crackling bravely in the hearth, feels overwhelmed, its glow swallowed by the vastness of the chill around it. This wasn't unusual, it was normal. Outdoor temperatures dipped low enough to freeze water left in buckets by morning. Indoors, the difference was small, just enough to keep frost from forming on the walls, but not enough to stop fingers from going numb, or joints from stiffening. Children slept with their heads under blankets, not for comfort, but because the cold air burned their ears. At night, hypothermia wasn't a dramatic event. It was quiet, slow, creeping into the body as people slept. A shiver ignored, a fire that burned too low, a blanket pulled too thin. These small missteps could turn fatal by dawn. The cold numbed the senses, lulled people into a dangerous half-sleep, where waking grew harder and drifting away felt deceptively peaceful. Frostbite didn't care about status or strength. It claimed noses, fingertips, and toes with equal indifference. You can almost imagine someone waking in the dim morning light, flexing their hands and feeling nothing. They would rub their fingers, blow warm breath onto them, hoping sensation would return before fear did. And sometimes it didn't. The cold also lived in the lungs. Each inhale was sharp, bracing, carrying dampness and chill that settled deep inside the chest. Coughs were common, harsh, tearing sounds that echoed through cottages at night. A simple winter cough could turn into something worse. Fevers that rose too high, breath that rattled too long, the kind of illnesses that lingered without medicine strong enough to stop them. And the nights felt endless. Darkness came early, swallowing the sky, stretching hours into something heavy and oppressive. Time moved slowly in the cold, as if each minute resisted being lived through. People listened to the wind outside, gauging its strength, feeling the way it vibrated through the walls. Every gust reminded them how thin the barrier was between survival and exposure. Yet for all its brutality, the cold shaped them. It taught them to read the weather in the colour of the sky, in the stiffness of the air, in the habits of animals. It made them attentive, cautious, and painfully aware of how fragile a human body is against the elements. It forged their instincts, when to add wood to the fire, when to huddle closer, when to stay awake just a little longer to make sure the flame didn't die. And you understand then, standing in that dim, smoky cottage, hearing the cold press against the walls like a living thing, that medieval peasants weren't simply enduring winter. They were surviving a battlefield. One fought not with swords or shields, but with breath, warmth, and hope that morning would come. You step inside a medieval peasant's home expecting relief, but what greets you instead is a different kind of cold, one that lingers, settles, and refuses to leave. The cottage feels like a fragile shell against the winter, more a suggestion of shelter than a promise of warmth. Every surface, every breath, every shadow reminds you that this place was never built to defend against the night. The walls are wattle and daub, thin wooden slats woven like ribs, packed with mud, straw, and whatever could be gathered from the earth. You run your hand along them and feel the roughness, the uneven texture, the faint crumble of dried clay. They were made with care, but the cold slips through their gaps as if invited. You can sense draughts moving along the walls like invisible fingers, brushing past your skin, searching for places to settle. Above you, the thatched roof rustles with every gust outside. Its straw layers are thick, but not sealed. Wind pushes through them in thin, icy threads that drift down into the room. In heavy storms, snow can even sift through in tiny flakes, melting as they land near the hearth. The roof creaks softly, like an old man shifting in his sleep, reminding you that even this small barrier is struggling against the weight of winter. The floor beneath you is dirt, cold, packed, unforgiving. It holds the chill the way stone holds memory. Every footstep seems to wake the cold that lives in the earth, sending it rising into the air. People lay straw across it, layer after layer, trying to soften it, trying to keep the damp from creeping upwards. But the cold always finds a way. Yet the centre of the home is the hearth, small, smoky, stubborn. There is no chimney, only a hole in the roof or a vent near the eaves, so smoke coils through the room before seeking escape. It stings your eyes, clings to your hair, burrows into your clothes. But here, smoke is forgiveness. Smoke is comfort. It means the fire is alive. That warmth still exists somewhere in this house. Families gather close to it, forming a circle of fragile protection. The fire isn't bright or fierce. It's a low, glowing creature, its embers pulsing like a heartbeat. Wood is precious, too precious to burn freely. Every log is rationed. Flames are encouraged gently, like a child being coaxed to stay awake. At night, families sleep near this hearth, their beds pushed towards the centre of the room. Not because the space is cosy, but because distance from the fire is a risk. They press in close to one another, their breath warm against shared blankets, their bodies forming a barrier against the cold. The air smells of wool, smoke, and earth, raw human scents mingled with the unfiltered breath of winter. Insulation is improvised, moss stuffed into cracks, mud layered again and again, old cloth hung over doorways that never quite seal shut. Even the animals contribute warmth. Sometimes goats, pigs, or chickens stay indoors, their bodies radiating heat into the space. Their presence is not a burden, but a blessing. You notice how every item in the home has a purpose. Straw mats hung on walls to block drafts. Clay pots set near the fire to hold on to heat. Cloaks spread across door frames. And still, the cold sneaks in, settling deep into the room's corners where darkness thickens. But there is something else here too. Something stronger than the cold. a quiet resilience woven into the very structure of the home. These walls, this roof, this fire, they carry the memory of centuries. They hold the stories of people who learned to live where survival was never guaranteed. You stand in the centre of the room and feel it all. The cold pressing from the outside, the warmth fighting from within. And you understand that this cottage, humble as it is, isn't just a house. It is a battlefield, a fragile fortress against a relentless season. And for the people who lived here, it was enough. You don't understand how precious fire is until you step into a world where it is the only thing standing between life and the cold. In medieval winter, fire wasn't comfort. It wasn't ambience. It was survival. A small, flickering defiance against a darkness that could swallow a household whole. Fire was everything, and everything depended on fire. Before sunset, you see peasants gather wood with the urgency of people preparing for war. The forests around them aren't generous, especially in winter. Fallen branches are rare, dry branches rarer, and every piece of wood feels like a treasure. Each log carried home is a victory. One more hour of warmth secured. Fire starting itself is an act of patience and skill. There are no lighters, no matches, just flint, steel, dry tinder, and hands practiced through necessity. You crouch beside them, watching sparks leap like tiny stars into the waiting mass of straw and twigs. The first curl of smoke is a relief, the first ember a promise. They breathe gently, coaxing the ember into flame, nurturing it the way someone might comfort a frightened child. Once lit, the fire becomes the centre of the home, the heart, the guardian, the silent companion. But this flame is fragile. It must be fed, protected, respected, because the night is waiting. The darkness outside grows thick, pressing against the cottage walls. Without fire, the cold pours in unchallenged, crawling over the floor, climbing into the beds, stealing warmth from the bodies resting within. You feel the room shrink as night deepens. The fire's glow, the only thing keeping the darkness from swallowing everything. Families sit near it, their faces bathed in its amber light. Shadows dance across the rough walls, stretching and shrinking with every crackle. The smoke is heavy, but no one complains. They have learned to live with stinging eyes and soot-stained ceilings. These are small prices to pay for survival. And yet, fire itself is dangerous. A stray spark, a shifting log, a gust of wind pushing through the thatch. Any of these could turn the cottage into an inferno. Winter fires were as feared as winter cold. Many families kept buckets of water or sand nearby, always ready, always watching. To keep the flame alive until morning, peasants use a technique called banking. They bury the glowing embers under ash, protecting them from drafts, allowing the fire to sleep without dying. In the morning the ash is brushed back, and with a little tinder and breath, the fire wakes again. Sometimes, despite their efforts, the flame fades in the night. You feel the panic in the room when someone stirs and notices the glow has dimmed. A cold that once kept its distance begins creeping closer. Someone rushes to the hearth, shaking hands trying to revive the embers before they slip into blackness. The room holds its breath, knowing what it means if the fire dies completely. Someone must journey into the night to borrow fire from a neighbour, and that walk is dangerous. The cold, the dark, the wind, the unseen. But community keeps people alive. Villagers share flame without hesitation. knowing tomorrow they might be the ones knocking on a door in the dark, cradling a clay pot that needs refilling with life. In long houses, where several families gather under one roof, the fires burn brighter, hotter, more steadily. The scent of smoke is thicker, the heat deeper, bodies packed together in a shared effort to push back the winter. Fire here isn't just warmth, it's connection. It pulls people close, wraps them into a single, breathing unit of survival. You sit by that fire and watch how the light softens faces, how the crackling sparks create a rhythm that feels ancient and familiar. Fire is not just a tool, it is memory, it is hope. It is the thin, flickering line between the medieval peasant and the cold waiting outside. And as the flame dances, you understand. In this world, night is the enemy. Fire is the shield. You don't think of clothing as armour. Not really. Modern fabric is soft, light, chosen for comfort or style. But in medieval winter, clothing wasn't decoration. It was the final barrier between a fragile body and a cold that could steal breath, movement, even life. The moment you step outside, you feel why layers mattered more than anything. The wind doesn't simply brush your skin, it hunts for weaknesses. The gap between a sleeve and a glove, the thinness of a hood, the looseness of a cloak. Every opening is an invitation for the cold to slip in. Wool is everywhere. Rough, heavy, scratchy wool that clings to the body with a stubborn loyalty. It smells faintly of animals and lanolin, even after washing. But wool is magic here. It insulates even when wet, keeps heat close, breathed just enough to stop sweat from freezing against skin. It is the peasant's shield. You watch a villager dress, and it's a ritual. A woolen undershirt tugged over chilled skin. A tunic layered on top, then another. Thick leggings. Woolen socks wrapped carefully around the feet, sometimes replaced or padded with scraps of cloth when holes form. Feet are then bound or laced into leather shoes stuffed with straw for insulation. A simple trick that could mean the difference between warmth and frostbite. The cloak is the final touch. A heavy swinging piece of fabric that feels like carrying a small animal on your shoulders. It traps heat close, shields from wind, and creates a pocket of warmth against the chest. When a villager pulls it tight, it becomes a cocoon, a moving shelter. Many wear furs when they can afford them. Rabbit, sheep, goat. The fur lies heavy across shoulders or tucked around the neck, the soft underside brushing skin like a whisper of comfort in a brutal season. Some wrap belts around their layers to keep heat sealed in, the leather stiff from cold but essential. Straw is used too, tucked inside clothing for added insulation. It rustles as people move, but no one cares about the sound. Warmth has no room for pride. Hands are wrapped in wool or cloth, often layered twice. It's not enough to give real dexterity, but enough to keep fingers from burning in the cold. When working outside, peasants pull their sleeves over their hands, using their clothing itself as a shield. Night brings its own clothing ritual. People sleep in whatever they wore during the day. Removing layers is a luxury warmth won't allow. Woolen caps cover their heads, because so much heat escapes there. Babies are wrapped tightly, swaddled in wool and skins. Adults tuck heated stones from the fire into their bedding. Feeling the warmth seep slowly into aching joints. Clothing becomes part of identity. The smell of smoke trapped in fibres. The roughness against skin. The weight of layers pressing comfortingly against the body. Winter turns every garment into a lifeline, every thread a shield. You run your hand along a woolen sleeve and feel its story, spun by hand, dyed with plants, mended repeatedly. Each stitch is a testament to someone's determination to survive the season, not to be fashionable, not to be admired, but to make it through another night. And as you watch villagers move through the cold, wrapped in their layers, rustling, bundled, burdened, but protected, you realise that their clothing is not simply worn, it is lived in, it is trusted. It is the thin, stubborn line between endurance and defeat. Night in a medieval village carries a stillness that feels almost heavy, as if the world holds its breath the moment the sun drops. And inside the peasant's cottage, bedtime was not a gentle retreat into softness. It was a nightly negotiation with the cold, with discomfort, with fear, and with the fragile hope that morning would come. It is quiet during these hours, but not silent. Someone stirs, checks the fire, whispers a prayer. 10, you look around the single-room home and quickly understand, sleep here is not rest. It is strategy. It is survival. Beds are scarce. Some families have raised wooden frames, simple constructions of rough boards held together with pegs and prayer. Others sleep on piles of straw laid directly on the dirt floor, the straw crackling beneath their weight, releasing earthy scents that cling to the air. Even the wooden beds are topped with straw mattresses, stuffed and restuffed throughout winter as the material breaks down or grows damp. The bedding is the patchwork of necessity. Wool blankets heavy as stone, cured animal skins with their warm, faintly musky smell. Layers of cloth that have been mended so many times, the original fabric is impossible to recognise. You touch one blanket and feel its coarseness, the way the fibres scratch lightly against your fingertips. But when the room is freezing, texture is a distant concern. Weight is what matters. Warmth is what matters. Families sleep close together, often all in the same bed or pressed right beside one another on the floor. Privacy is a luxury winter cannot afford. Bodies share warmth because the cold takes every opportunity to steal it away. A parent wraps an arm around a child, pressing them close. A sibling shifts in their sleep, and another adjusts automatically. The movements practiced and wordless. The warmth of others becomes a kind of shield, a small miracle produced simply by the presence of another living body. As you watch them settle, you notice how everything revolves around the fire. No one sleeps far from it. The hearth glows in the centre of the room, a dim, pulsing ember that everyone orients themselves toward. Beds inch closer during the coldest nights. Those sleeping farther away wrap themselves tighter, tucking blankets under their feet to trap precious heat. Someone checks the embers again, banking them carefully under ash, making sure the fire will last until morning. It is never truly dark. The faint glow of the coals bleeds softly into the room, casting long shadows across the walls. Sometimes a log shifts and sparks leap, briefly illuminating weary faces before fading back into darkness. The smell of smoke lingers, mixed with wool, damp earth, and the faint sweetness of dried rushes scattered on the floor. Medieval people practiced segmented sleep, something modern life has forgotten. First sleep came soon after dusk. People drifted into a heavy slumber, the exhaustion of the day pulling them down quickly. Then, sometime in the middle of the night, they would wake naturally. The cottage stays to a child, or simply lies awake, listening to the wind clawing at the walls. The darkness feels softer during this waking period, as though the night itself has paused to let them gather strength. Then comes second sleep, a return to rest that carries them toward dawn. This rhythm feels ancient and deeply human, the body aligning itself with a world without clocks, schedules, or glowing screens. The wakefulness between sleeps is like a whispered conversation with the night, an acknowledgement of its presence and power. There are dangers even here in the stillness of sleep. A fire that burns too low can let the cold seep in, numbing limbs until they fail to wake. A draft that wasn't noticed during the day becomes a silent intruder. A blanket that slips off in the night might not be felt until fingers are stiff with chill. People wake often, adjusting layers, pulling children closer, listening to the crackle of the hearth for reassurance. As you lie among them, close enough to feel their shared warmth, you understand something about medieval winter nights. Survival was a group effort. No one slept alone by choice. Isolation was cold's greatest ally, community its greatest enemy. The bedding may be rough, the straw may prick your skin, the air may sting when you inhale, but together, pressed close in the flickering light of the hearth, they endure, night after night after night. When the cold settles into a medieval village, food becomes more than nourishment. It becomes warmth, a flame lit from the inside. And in a world where winter strips the land bare and freezes the ground solid, every meal is a quiet victory against the season. You step into the cottage and feel it instantly, the hunger that lingers in the air like a second presence, the smell of simmering grains, the faint sweetness of root vegetables, the smoky tang of anything cooked over the hearth. It all mixes with the cold that still clings to the walls. Peasants didn't eat to feel full. They ate to keep their bodies from surrendering to the chill. And you begin to understand that survival in winter wasn't just about warmth from the outside. It was about fueling the fire within. Porridge is the heart of winter meals. Thick, filling, and humble. You watch as a pot of oats or barley bubbles slowly over the hearth, its surface steaming in the dim light. The smell is earthy, comforting, simple. Sometimes it's thinned with water, sometimes enriched with a splash of milk if the animals produced enough that day. Peasants stir it patiently, knowing this bowl may be all they get until tomorrow. Bread is a constant companion, dense, coarse, sometimes hard enough to require soaking in warm ale or broth. You chew a piece and feel the crunch of grain, the heaviness of it settling in your stomach. This bread wasn't made for pleasure, it was made to last. And in winter, its weight is a blessing. Root vegetables, carrots, turnips, onions, parsnips, become the quiet heroes of the season. Pulled from root cellars where they have slept for months in the cool dark, they carry the faint scent of earth. When thrown into a pot, they soften slowly, releasing sweetness that feels almost like hope. Meat is rare and precious. Most of it is salted, smoked, or dried long before winter begins. A sliver added to a stew is enough to transform the pot, turning thin water into something richer, deeper. The saltiness hits your tongue, reminding you how much time and effort went into preserving it. Fresh meat is a luxury, usually the result of an animal that died or a communal slaughter shared among families. And then there is warm ale, not the crisp, cold drink you know, but something thick, soft, slightly sour. Heated by the fire, It loosens stiff muscles, pushes warmth through the body, and lingers in the chest. Children drink it too, though theirs is watered down. Clean water isn't guaranteed. Ale, even weak ale, is safer. Hot broths and mulled drinks make their appearance on the coldest nights. Spices are rare and expensive, but when they do appear, a bit of cinnamon, a whisper of clove, the aroma fills the cottage with a sweetness that feels almost magical. It turns an ordinary winter evening into something special, a reminder that comfort still exists. You watch how peasants eat, and it changes your understanding of hunger. There is no rushing, no mindless snacking, no abundance. Every bite is measured, shared, appreciated. A child leans against their mother, holding out a wooden bowl. A father passes a piece of bread to someone who looks more worn than he does. There is a rhythm to the meal, a quiet unity that grows from facing the same relentless cold. Food is rationed carefully. Some nights are thinner than others. A ladle of watery broth, a crust of bread, a vegetable or two. Bodies grow lean in winter, cheeks hollow slightly. You feel the truth settle inside you. Winter is not kind, and food is not guaranteed. But when warmth fills their bellies, even a little, you see it. The slow relaxing of shoulders. The way breath fogs the air less sharply. The small laughter that escapes when a child spills porridge or tells a half-remembered story. This is how body heat is made, how life is sustained, through shared meals, through humble ingredients, through the understanding that each mouthful is fuel for the long night ahead. You watch them finish their meal, scrape bowls clean, and place them near the fire to dry. The glow reflects off tired faces, softening them, giving them strength for what comes next. The cold still waits outside, patient as ever. But for now, there is warmth within. Fragile, fleeting, but fiercely held. In the deep grip of winter, when the cold pressed into every crack of the world and hunger walked the village like a familiar shadow, survival was never a solitary act. A single person could not outlast the night. A single fire could not keep an entire family warm. A single pair of hands could not gather enough wood, mend every tear, tend every wound, and guard against every danger. But a village could. And so the medieval peasant survived not just through strength or endurance, but through one another. You step into a longhouse on a frigid evening, and the first thing you feel is the warmth of bodies. It's not just the heat from the central fire that fills the space. It's the presence of people, packed close enough that the air itself seems to pulse with shared breath. Children laugh softly near the adults, their cheeks pink from the heat. Women sit mending torn clothing, fingers moving steadily despite the cold lingering in their joints. Men return from the twilight fields or woodlands, shaking frost from their cloaks, stamping warmth back into their feet. The space smells of smoke, wool, and the faint sweetness of dried herbs hanging from the rafters. Talk fills the air, low, familiar, comforting. You hear exchanges about the weather, about someone's lingering cough, about a neighbour whose fire nearly died the night before. The conversations are simple, but every word carries a weight of connection. These people know one another's rhythms, strengths, weaknesses, fears. In winter, this bond becomes something sacred. When the wind howls violently outside, and the cold knocks against the walls with demanding fists, neighbours gather under one roof. Some nights see 3 or 4 families sharing the same fire, arranging their beds in a circle, turning the longhouse into a fortress of warmth. Breath mingles in the air. Blankets overlap. Children from different families curl into the same pile of wool and fur, their sleep deep and peaceful, because they know they are safe in numbers. Storytelling becomes a lifeline. You watch as someone leans forward, voice soft but animated, weaving tales of spirits in the forest, of saints who protect travellers, of wolves who howl only when danger approaches. Stories become maps of meaning, guiding fear, easing minds, filling the darkness with imagination instead of dread. In the flickering firelight, faces glow in gold and shadow. You see eyes widen at a dramatic moment, hear a gasp from a child, feel the room lean in together as the storyteller's voice drops to a whisper. These moments knit the community tighter than any meeting or ritual. They turn fear into shared experience, transforming the night from a threat into something almost human. Superstition is part of survival too. People hang charms over doorways, twigs twisted into shapes, dried flowers tied with string, symbols carved into wood, not because they fully believe these items have magic, but because belief itself warms the mind. A small shield against the unknown, a reminder that others place their hope in the same mysteries. When a family's fire goes out, they don't hesitate. Someone lifts a lid from a clay pot and rushes into the night, feet crunching over frost, breath puffing sharply into the air. They hurry to a neighbour's door and knock. And the door always opens. No questions, no delay. A glowing ember is passed into the pot, the lid is shut, and the warmth is carried home like a priceless treasure. Sharing is not generosity, it's survival. When a child is sick, multiple households bring broth. When someone loses livestock, others bring wool or milk or help repair a pen. When someone mourns, the entire village mourns. Winter turns villagers into a single body, every life connected to the next. You sit among them and feel the truth settle inside you. The cold may rule the land, but community rules the night. A fire is brighter when more hands tend it. A home is safer when more footsteps gather near it. And fear is smaller when it must face not one person, but many. This is how medieval peasants survived. Not alone in silence, but together in warmth. A web of stories, hands, hearts and hope, woven tightly enough to outlast the longest night. Night in a medieval winter was not a gentle blanket of darkness. It was a living force, shifting and waiting, carrying dangers both seen and unseen. When the sun disappeared, and the last warmth faded from the sky, the world beyond the cottage walls transformed into something hostile, something unpredictable, something that watched. You step outside for only a moment, and the cold hit you with such intensity it feels like an actual blow. The air is sharp, metallic, and terrifyingly still. Frost coats every surface, glittering in the faint moonlight like tiny shards of glass. The silence is heavy, almost unnatural. No insects, no running water, no distant hum, just the faint creaking of frozen branches and the whisper of wind moving through the dark. It becomes clear quickly, the night is not empty, it is full of dangers that medieval peasants knew intimately. Hypothermia was the most silent of all enemies. You watch as a villager steps outside briefly to check the livestock or fetch a tool. Even wrapped in layers, their breath hangs thick and heavy in the air. A few minutes too long, a moment of distraction. and the cold creeps beneath their clothing like a hunter. Fingers stiffen, feet go numb, the body begins to tremble. And if they do not return to the fire soon, warmth slips away faster than they can reclaim it. Many didn't make it back. There were stories of men found only a few steps from their own doors, frozen mid-motion. Stories of travellers who laid down just to rest a moment and never rose again. Stories of children who wandered outside after sunset, chasing a curious sound, and disappeared into the night. Even inside the home, danger waited. The fire that kept everyone alive could falter. A misplaced log, a gust pulling through a hidden crack, a moment of neglect, and the embers dim. When the fire goes quiet, the cold moves fast, sliding across the floor, curling around bodies, stealing warmth from breath and skin. People wake to numb limbs, shallow breaths, joints that refuse to bend. There was a phrase whispered in hushed tones. The deadly sleep, a sleep so deep and cold that waking becomes difficult, sometimes impossible. You could slip into it without realizing, lulled by exhaustion and chilled air, and never return. Mothers often reached out in the night, touching their children's hands or feet to make sure they were still warm. Partners pressed close, sharing breath, grounding each other in life. Animals posed risks as well. Wolves moved closer to villages during the harshest winters, driven by hunger and desperation. Their howls carried across frozen fields, long and haunting, sending shivers down the spines of those listening inside. Sometimes a wolf approached too close, drawn by livestock or scraps. People gathered at the window shutters, listening intently, hoping the animals would move on. Illness also thrived in the cold. A simple cough had the weight of danger. Smoke-filled rooms irritated lungs. Cold air stiffened chest muscles, and untreated infections could settle deep and refuse to leave. A fever in winter was a terrifying thing. Sweat chilling too quickly, water scarce, remedies limited. Many survived the cold only to be undone by sickness that followed. And then there were the fears that lived in the imagination. Fears that were no less real. The darkness itself felt alive. Peasants believed spirits wandered on winter nights, especially between midnight and dawn. Shadows moved strangely in the firelight, and the wind carried sounds that stirred unease. Children listened to their parents' warnings. Never open the door at night, never wander near the forest after sunset, never ignore a chill that feels unnatural. Superstition mixed with reality until the two became inseparable. A strange sound outside could be a wolf, could be the cold shifting the earth, or to some it was something else, something that should not be named aloud. You feel a tightness in your chest as you sit near the fire and hear the wind batter the walls. The flames flicker, shadows jump, and for a moment you understand their fear. The night feels infinite. The walls feel thin. The cold feels patient. And yet, despite all these dangers, peasants faced every night with a steady, practiced courage. They tended the fire, checked the doors, kept their families close. They learned to listen, truly listen, to the world around them, to the warnings in the wind, to the silence between the sounds. Because they knew that fear alone couldn't protect them. Only awareness, togetherness, and the relentless will to live could. The medieval night was a gauntlet of threats, but still they endured it, night after night, winter after winter. You've walked through the cold with them, stood inside their fragile homes, shared their fires, tasted their food, and felt their fear of the night. And now, at the end of this journey, one truth becomes impossible to ignore. Medieval peasants were not simply surviving winter, they were mastering it in ways we can barely imagine. Their resilience wasn't loud or heroic. It didn't look like grand gestures or dramatic victories. It lived in the quiet, persistent choices they made every day. The gathering of firewood, the mending of torn clothing, the rationing of bread, the banking of the fire, the comforting of a frightened child during a windstorm, the way they instinctively came together when the nights stretched long and cold. This resilience was woven into them, taught by the land, shaped by the seasons, passed down through generations that knew nothing but struggle. You watch a peasant woman pull her cloak tighter around her shoulders as she steps outside to feed the animals before dusk. Her movements are tired but steady, her breath visible in the fading light. She doesn't flinch at the cold. She has known it her entire life. You see a man splitting wood with numb hands, each swing measured, each breath controlled. A child helps carry bundles of straw, learning young what it means to contribute, to endure, to be part of a family's survival. These people did not choose hardship, but they grew strong because of it. Not strong in the way you think of strength today, measured by muscles or achievement or comfort. Strong in the way trees are strong, bending with the wind, surviving storms, rooted deeply enough to endure every blow. Their community held them together. Their traditions taught them how to withstand the cold. Their instincts guided them when danger crept too close. And maybe the most remarkable thing is this: they found life inside the struggle. You've seen it. The small moments of laughter around the fire, the shared meals passed from hand to hand, the stories told in the dim glow of embers, the way neighbours opened doors without hesitation when someone needed help. In those moments, warmth wasn't just physical. It was emotional, human, communal. Despite sickness, despite hunger, despite the constant threat of the night, they lived with a quiet dignity, a steady heartbeat of hope that carried them through even the coldest winters. Their resilience came not from conquering the world around them, but from accepting it, respecting its dangers, learning its patterns, adapting to its harshness. They didn't fight nature. They survived with it, against it, through it. And when you compare their lives to the softness of your own world, the heaters, the lights, the thick blankets, the stocked kitchens, you realise how far removed you are from their reality. One night in their world might break you, but they endured thousands. You leave the medieval village with a deeper understanding of what resilience truly means. It is not noise. It is not bravado. It is not ease. It is the quiet decision to keep going, to light one more fire, to share one more meal, to face one more night, to believe against all odds that spring will come. When the first light of dawn touches the frost outside their homes, peasants rise once again. They move with tired limbs and heavy breaths, but with the certainty that they have survived another night, another trial, another lesson in endurance. And as smoke drifts into the pale morning sky, you realize this: resilience is not something you show. It is something you live. You've walked their frozen paths, stood beside their trembling fires, and felt the cold pressing through walls that barely held the darkness back. And now, looking from the outside with modern eyes, one thing becomes clear. You wouldn't last a day in their world, not because you're weak, but because they were built differently, shaped by a life far harsher, far colder, far more unforgiving than anything you've ever known. But for them, this was home. A world carved from frost and flame. A place where survival was earned each night through grit, instinct, and the threads of community woven tightly together. They didn't have central heating or soft linens or hot meals waiting in clean kitchens. They had wool that scratched their skin, fires that smoked their eyes, and nights so cold the stars themselves felt brittle. But they also had something stronger than the winter, each other. And maybe that is the lesson hidden in the cold. That survival is never a solitary act, that resilience lives in small choices, in shared warmth, in stubborn hope, in the refusal to let the night win. So as you return to your well-lit, climate-controlled world, remember the people who endured the coldest nights with nothing but handmade walls, layered wool, flickering firelight, and the quiet courage to face another dawn. They survived because they had to. You wouldn't last a day. And that's exactly what makes their story extraordinary.